Thank you, Amber, for taking the time to be here. I really appreciate it. You've been on the show before, and we've had a really good conversation. And today we're going to talk about like when our kids move out, whatever that looks like for them, group home versus residential versus whatever other options there are out there, and just kind of compare what our stories have been like. Could you, before we do that though, could you take a second, kind of introduce yourself, remind people who you are and kind of what you do, and then we'll just dive into it.
Definitely. Well, thanks for having me back. My name is Amber Arrington. My company is called Autism Savvy, but I'm a mother to 6 children, 3 of whom are autistic. And I tend to talk with you about my older one, which is fun because I don't have a lot of people to talk about that angle with. He's 20, but I also do have little girls that are also autistic. They're 4 and 5.5.
Wow. And it's time we're recording this. I'm actually releasing a new episode at midnight tonight about the differences in boys versus girls, because that's a big thing too. So what is your experience been like with your oldest, and whether it's independent living or however, what has your experience been like?
Yeah. Okay. So it's like where to start. I have to say the decision to ever say we're going to go the group home route was definitely years in the making. And as a reminder for anybody, well, probably many who don't actually know the whole story, Tyson, my son, did not receive his medical diagnosis till he was 12 for autism. So it took a long time before we really could come to terms with the fact that he might not have quite the future that we thought that he would have. Not sure if college would happen, not sure if marriage will happen, not sure if holding down jobs will happen. It took me a long time to come around to that. But what 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 brought me around to the idea was something that I would have expected. I have a business. I don't really do that part of the business anymore, but I do people's lashes and eyebrows. And one of my clients, this complete stranger, started coming to me for her eyebrows. Come to find out, she runs group homes in my state is Arizona for men with disabilities. And when she first started talking to me about that, I could just talk about that for a long time because she helped me down the path to put so many things in place for my son that I didn't even know were possible. And I think we should talk about like disability agencies and waivers and stuff like that later.
Mhm.
But suffice it to say, she kind of convinced me that a group home could be a really positive thing. And like that was the beginnings of it.
So, um, for me, it was more along the lines of well, when Gavin was younger, he's 24 now. When he was younger, he had a lot of behavioral issues and things like that. And one of the things that we were advised to look at that point, just because the behaviors are so extreme, was like a residential type, long-term kind of residential care in order to kind of preserve the integrity of the family as a whole, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of people maybe don't understand that, or they feel one way or another about that, but it's just the reality that a lot of families live in. Mine was one of them. We ended up not ever doing that, only because there wasn't, well, for a lot of reasons, I guess, but there wasn't anything available. And as he got older, I just sort of assumed that he was going to be living with me for the rest of my life. And my goal would be to worry about what happens, or to prepare for what happens after that time. And he, during COVID, we were on lockdown for like 15 months because he is immunocompromised. So we had to protect him. And he got tired of living with us. Like he was like, you guys drive me crazy. I don't want to do this anymore. And it was at that age where kids start thinking about moving out. So there were some like typical kid things in there too. And that kind of started us down the path of like, well, what would this look like for him? How, like, is this possible? Can we do this safely? Kind of things. And, for him, he was just like very focused and motivated and doing his thing. And for me, it was like, I'm really unsure of this. It makes me very, very nervous. But he has proven to do really, really well. and his situation is like a group home type setting. It's like a duplex, right? Like a multi-dwelling. And he lives with peers, people relatively similar to him in age, and he's doing really well. There's part-time staff there to supervise and to interact and help them navigate things that might come up along the way. But it's been okay.
Yeah.
I think it was harder for me than it was for him, because I had to step back and let other people take the lead with him, and I've never done that before. And I've raised him since he was a year old, so I've been kind of that person for him this whole time. And so there's like emotional hurdles and things that we have to go through. But yeah, for like the group home thing, I know there's a lot of like stigma attached to that, but I don't know what it looks like everywhere. But in our case, it's just a duplex with like 4 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms, and he has friends that he lives with, and that's it. I mean, it's not really anything more than that. And there's accommodations in place and stuff like that. But that's what the group home looks like for us, anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds really positive. And the thing that I've come to understand is there's like different levels of these types of situations. Like you hear, like group home is the blanket term, or residential facility might be another blanket term. But there's like all these variations of possibilities under this umbrella. And so it sounds like maybe your son has one where there's a little bit more flexibility because he doesn't have 24/7 staff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is he allowed to come and go? Is he allowed to have visitors over?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He
Okay.
goes to work. He goes to day service. He has transportation set up so that whenever he needs to go somewhere, that they come and pick him up and whatever. But he's largely living independently.
Yeah. So, if this will be helpful for your listeners, I want to explain the types of living arrangements for our adult children with disabilities that like are in Arizona. And then I've done a little bit of research. It sounds like the majority of states have the similar options. Now they're all going to have like different names and probably wait lists for some, and like it's going to be slightly different everywhere. But okay, so my son, for example, he lives in what is called a habilitation group home. It is a house. He also, like your son, has roommates. He has 2 roommates now. They're around his age, but he does have 24/7 care. He is not allowed to be left alone. They help make sure that like they're at least prompting that he takes his pills, that he does his hygiene, that he eats his food. He does have the transportation to go to day program. If he had a job, he'd have that transportation too. They make sure food's in the house. So like he feels independent, but that support is always there, always. Like they would be liable if he was ever left alone. And what's interesting about this is people might think, wow, your son must need a lot of care. Well, yes and no. He would be considered level 1 high functioning on the spectrum, but he needs a lot of support. And if he was left to his own independence at this point in time, it would be a disaster. So that is what works for him, and that is what works for us right now. But then there's like, that's the habilitation group home, but then they have something that's kind of a step down. It's called an adult, I don't want to say it wrong. It's called like an adult group home, where it's more run like a family. It's in someone's house. There's probably a mom or a dad that are over it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they have a little bit more, like they would be able to be left alone there. They would still have support, but there's a little bit more independence, but it's more like a family structure and probably less turnover of staff in a situation like that. And then like the ultimate goal is they have programs where they could go live in an apartment independent, but then we could even bring supports in for that to help with medication, cleaning, paying bills. So like there's these tiers of support that we can put in place for our adult children.
And that's outside of like that like residential care type facilities.
Yes.
So with Gavin, when we were looking into this, there were a couple of options that were available. Some like you said, there's a lot of wait lists for certain things. But one of the big things that we had to kind of choose between was there are I can't remember what they're called, therapeutic something housing, I think. I can't remember what it's called, but it's very similar to what you described, where like families have like a room, and the kid
Yeah.
or the person lives with their family, and they rent the room or whatever, and you can go that route. So there is somebody there, usually 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not necessarily, designed as like staff members per se, but more just presence, there's also a setup here with college kids where college kids can get free room and board by living with people with developmental disabilities and being like a mentor and things like that. And so there's a lot of
Oh,
people who are
wow.
going into that field who are open to things like that, and there's like screening processes and stuff like that, but that was another option. There are some kind of like assisted living places for people with developmental disabilities. We didn't really look at that because I felt like he just needed somebody to remind him of things sometimes. It's
Yeah.
really it. And so we came across, this option, and, it's as independent as I think he's comfortable being right now. And it allows him the freedom to do pretty much whatever he wants, whenever he wants. But there's safety nets in place,
Yeah.
so like we can't go too far off the radar or whatever, but he does really well. I mean, I would say that he's thriving, in the sense that like he's existing on his own, managing majority of his own life. And while it's not perfect, he's happy,
Yeah.
and he's managing. And I mean, that's all any of us are doing, really, hopefully.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm curious. So, what entity, or is it self, is paying for his group home?
Well, he pays his own rent. Like he has to.
Okay.
It's not so there's not in Ohio, at least where I'm at. There isn't funding to cover housing unless it's medically related. There's funding to cover accommodations and supports in place, but you're responsible for the rent. So, he works his job, he pays his rent. I manage his SSI, what's left of it, because he's working now, so the amount dropped down.
Yeah.
And then, so like I order him groceries, at the beginning of every month, and cover the expenses that he has, like his Netflix and his cell phone and all that kind of stuff. But as far as like covering the rent, that's entirely
Wow.
on us. Yeah. So,
Okay.
that was another
What
thing.
age? What age did he get Social Security?
Oh, he was like 6 or 7.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, you could start really early, and the big thing for him was the insurance, because that was before the Affordable Care Act, and when insurers were denying people for things like autism and whatever, and he had so many health issues and so many problems that needed to be managed, whether it was medication or therapies or whatever, and it would have been impossible without
Hmm. Yeah.
Medicaid insurance through SSI.
Well, that's great. It's so interesting to learn how it works other places. I wish there was a master list, and there isn't.
No. So I think universally in the US, the first place to start typically, I think, is with the Board of DD in your county, your local area. And you get on, you apply for a waiver. I think he's
Mhm.
on an IO waiver, level 1 waiver. I can't remember what the difference is between the two, and I can't remember which one he's on. And there's in a lot of places there's wait lists for that, but Ohio did away with wait lists and
Yeah.
went they triage them now. So it's like by need and by need, I guess, basically.
Yeah.
So we went in for the interview process, and he did his thing, and ultimately he was approved, and that covers all of his transportation. It covers job training and things like that. And if something comes up where, there needed to be accommodations made to the house, that he's living in, or inclusion of like staff members or staffing in general or whatever, that covers all of that kind of stuff. But like the rent itself is,
Yeah.
and like groceries, all that kind of stuff is, we're responsible for.
Got it. Well, it still sounds like an awesome like situation
Mhm.
for your son.
Yeah.
And how many months has it been?
3 months, 3.5 months now.
Okay.
And there's still little hiccups that we get, but like last night he called me at 10:30 at night. I was already sleeping. The charge on his razor died halfway through shaving, right? So he had like half a beard, and he forgot to pack the charger. Why it took him 3 months to run through a charge means he's probably not shaving as often as he should. But I had to, run that over to him at 10:30 at night, and that took, an hour or whatever to get everything done. But he's doing the majority of the stuff on his own, and I'm learning, that the more independent that he gets from me, the more independent I become from him. And that's a good thing for me and for him, because like independence is different for everybody, right? It's not a one size fits all thing. And I feel like independence for our kids doesn't mean without help or needing things or whatever. It's more about independence from us as parents being their primary caregivers and existing without us being their go-to for everything, or at least not the first line of that. And that's the case for him right now. So that's a win. How has your situation been with your son?
So I was just thinking, Tyson, it's already been almost 3 years. November will be 3 years since he moved out. He moved out just shy of 18.
Okay.
He's been in the same home the whole time. And as I said, I was really comfortable with it because of my client that owned these homes. He ends up in one of her homes. And I had toured it, and I just felt comfortable, obviously. So he's been there. It's been great, generally speaking. Now, I think something we can talk about is the definition of thriving also being different for everybody, because if you would ask me how is your son doing? Is he thriving? Well, it depends on whose definition of thriving we're talking about. Not the things that I wish he was doing with his life, but is he happy? Yes, he's happy and he's content for now. And that's just where we're at. I would say all in all, it's gone well. Now, something we're facing that happens has been the group home. My client that owned these homes, she retired and she sold the homes almost a year ago. So there's been a lot of change. Different agency took over, but he stayed in the same house. But now they're moving houses, and there's been a lot of things I've been unhappy with. So we're looking at possibly making another change. And I've had to keep my pulse on all of this, and I'm trying to be strategic about how I'm going to facilitate this change. It's a whole thing. But generally, he's doing well. He has the support he needs. He goes to day program. He wouldn't want to come back home. He feels more independent because I don't know if this is in every state. Do you know about Article 9?
No.
Okay, maybe it's an Arizona thing. There's this Article 9 thing that essentially says, now that he's not in my home, the staff can suggest things to him. He is within his rights to refuse. So that's the difference between him living at home and us more so having leverage to make him do things that we might want him to do, like eat or shower. But in the group home, they can suggest and he can refuse, and they have to respect his choices.
Do you have guardianship?
I did get guardianship. We did, yes.
So yeah, I don't have guardianship, and I'm familiar with what you're talking about now. I don't think it's called Article 9 here. It's like I can't remember what it's called, but there were some examples of situations where kids, anybody younger than me is a kid, but situations where they have to respect what the client, right, wants.
Yeah.
Even if it's contrary to their health or their well-being, it's still their independent decision to make, right? And there I think there's problems with that sometimes.
It's tricky.
It's very tricky. But I think the idea is to make sure that everybody is as autonomous as possible and making their own decisions, whatever. But it doesn't take into account that those decisions sometimes aren't informed decisions, and that our kids don't always recognize the consequences, or they're thinking very much in the moment and not 5 minutes from now when there's a problem that's going to arise from something like this. I don't remember what it's called though.
Yeah. Well, that's a thing. And that's something, we had to consider, like giving over that control, like you said, when they move out and they have a little bit more or different kind of independence, you have to let go of some things that you were used to helping manage.
Yeah. It's tough, and like you're kind of into this a little bit longer. Your journey has been a little bit longer than mine has. So I'm still kind of wrapping my head around some of this stuff. So in my case, Gavin had all these behavioral challenges growing up. It was very, very difficult to manage. There were lots of psychiatric stays and self-injury, and he never would target anybody intentionally for anything, but there was collateral damage, destroying the house, all kinds of stuff like that. So there were legitimate safety concerns. He ended up just doing much, much better as time went on. Didn't need the interventions the way that he did when he was younger. But he had reached a point, before he moved out, and even the years leading up to this, where he had sort of outgrown the house, and he very much wanted to be on his own. So he was trying to be more assertive and all of that kind of stuff, which was creating challenges to coexist with him, especially with his younger brothers. And so he needed to move out. Like, we needed him to move out in order for us to survive, and he needed to move out in order for him to continue to grow. And I think both of those things can coexist at the same time, and that's okay. And I think for the people out there who are maybe placing their kids somewhere because it's what's best for the entire family, on top of being what's best for the kid, like, that's okay.
It's so okay. I was just visiting with a girlfriend of mine. She actually runs an agency that provides habilitation and respite services here in Arizona. And she, just like me, she has adopted several children, has a couple biological children of her own. But she was sharing with me that one of her sons she had to have placed in a group home for children, because I think he's only 16 or 17. But it became a situation where the caseworker was essentially telling her, like, his behavior is impacting your family in such a way that you're going to be liable if you don't protect the rest of your children from this child's behavior.
Yeah.
And that's real life. People that want to judge that, well, they haven't walked a day in our shoes.
Yeah. There is, that's such a good example of what many parents are going through. And even beyond that, you can look at the people who look at autism as like a superpower versus the people who don't. There are very different scenarios that people are existing in. And, for some people, it very much impacts every aspect of their life. And to view that as a superpower can be offensive to them or their parents, whatever the situation is. And then there's some kids who, two of mine are that way, where they're a little quirky, can drive me crazy, but otherwise do really, really well. And they are gifted in areas, whether it's because of the autism or not, it's just who they are, but gifted in certain areas, or they're naturally gravitating towards certain things that I can see why people might look at something like that as a superpower, but it's not the same thing for everybody. And I think that we have to be aware and sensitive to that, because everybody's experience is valid. And just because, mine is different than someone else's doesn't make mine any less valid than theirs, or theirs any less valid than mine. And I just think we need to be cognizant of that, because there is a lot of division in this community that is sparked by things like that.
For sure. And, you know, guardianship and group homes is one of them that people like to have opinions about. And
Oh yeah.
people, and this is what I've been trying to like sprinkle into my content when I post on social media, because I feel like largely I tend to attract people that are raising kids around my little girls' ages, right? 3, 4, 5 age bracket. And I'm trying to say, like, okay, you need to be thinking about down the road, because down the road, you've got to get things in place now so that you can have what you need down the road. And there may come a point where you're having to decide where your child lives. Do they live with you forever, or do you explore other options, or things are so bad in elementary school age bracket where like things are so hard on the home, you're looking at really hard decisions. So like it is good to be forward thinking, and it is good that we don't judge whatever decisions anybody needs to make.
Yeah. There was a quote that I just found the other day. It was like, people judge us by the decisions we make, not the choices we had. And that was like, that hit really hard, because it's so true. People are so quick to judge, oh, you're putting your kid here, or you're doing this, or you're in this therapy, or you're whatever. But they're not looking at the choices that you had to make. They're not looking at anything beyond what they see on the surface. And everybody has a story, and there's a reason for why parents do things the way that they do. You know, I mean, it doesn't have to make sense to everybody, but you're not living their life, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember people telling me things like, oh, you know, like Gavin does so well, I don't know why you guys have problems. I'm like, okay, well, let's let him stay with you for a few days, and we'll just see, you know, when that honeymoon phase goes away real quick, how that's going to work out for you. Because I've had to do that over the years when he was younger, and it was an eye opener for people. It's like, oh wow, like I had no idea. And I'm like, yeah, because we've been telling you that. But people don't always see things, you know, because there's triggers and whatever. And you know, it's just a tough thing to manage without that judgment and that ridicule, you know?
Yeah, it'd be great if we could all just be out here rooting each other on. Like, life is hard, parenting is hard, raising children with disabilities is super hard. We need to be each other's champions, not tearing each other down.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree. So what does it look like going forward for him with where he's living?
Yeah.
Is this going to be like a long-term kind of thing, or is it a stepping stone to something else? That makes sense.
It's hard to tell. I am not trying to underestimate the possibilities for him. I had a caseworker for him for like 5 years straight, who had an autistic son that was then in his 30s. And she would just say how much growth that she saw in her son between 20 and 30. And so I'm holding on for that. But I do see this habilitation group home probably for a while, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. I just would like to see him graduating to a more of a family style home. And I would love him to get to independent living. That's going to take a lot of maturity, and maybe it will happen and maybe it won't, but I'm really rooting for him.
Mhm.
At the moment, it seems like we want so much more for him than he wants for himself. And that's just kind of where it's at today.
Yeah. You know, Gavin has plans. He's got lots of plans. Not all of them, I think, are as practical or realistic as others. But he has plans, and I like the fact that he's planning for the future, you know?
Yeah.
You know, I could see a very real possibility of him, you know, maybe living in an apartment or something by himself. You know, I mean, I think that he could, there's all kinds of like smart home technology that you can employ that can help to make sure the stove is turned off and the doors are locked and like things like that, which is what he needs help with. But you know, right now he's happy and it's affordable, it's working, and it's you know, this is sort of whether this is where he's at for the rest of his journey, I don't know. But if he's happy and fulfilled by what he's doing, then that's ultimately, I think, what matters to me. And you know, if we make a move beyond this, I would think that move would be more either kind of a lateral move because it's just a good fit for him, maybe a new location, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, he finds a place where he's living more on his own without that need to have other people there. Because like he benefits from the staff members that other people in his house have. Because the
Yeah.
staff isn't going to be there just for their person. They're focused on that person, but they're there to also intervene for anything. And so he benefits from that as well. So he doesn't have like a dedicated staff member for himself. But yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot to work through. It does sound like Gavin is doing really good right now. So that's so exciting.
Yeah. Thank you. And, you know, I mean, I think everybody's situation is unique. And if you find something that works for you, it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. You know, it just works for you and that's it. That's all we got to worry about. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I think we just kind of wanted to broach this subject because we've been talking about this for a while, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of people that are asking questions. You know, because there's a lot out there who are talking about like the younger phase of you know our
Yeah.
kids' lives, and not as many people continuing into this older phase where we have to deal with that adult transitional stuff and whatever. So I think it's good that we're talking about it.
Yeah, I do too. I feel like maybe you need to point me to some other like accounts or people because I know of you and one other person. Nobody else is out
I know
talking.
Cariello.
That's who I'm
Oh
talking
yeah,
about.
well we're doubling up on that one. That's the only other person that I'm. Um, yeah, really. I mean, I know people, but not that are like sharing their stories online or anything like that.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot, you know. So I guess we may not have the resources for us as that reference, but we can be the resource for somebody else, you know.
Sure. Well, hopefully this helps some people get their wheels spinning about what might be possible.
Yeah. And it's just kind of a closing thought. Like, you know, people ask, one of the most common questions I think I get is when should I start preparing my kid for adulthood? And just assume from the moment your kid is born, they're going to be an adult someday and they're going to have to exist in this world without you, and just use that time to prepare over time, you know, like don't rob them of childhood stuff or whatever, but just, you know, life lessons and all kinds of things like that could be useful as they get older, because waiting till they're, you know, teenagers or young adults is what I
Yeah,
did.
it's too late. And just because they're autistic doesn't mean that they can't do things for themselves. I
Mhm.
mean, at least three or at least 2/3, right? If one third of the population might be more of the non-speaking, maybe their body is kind of not working the way the brain body disconnect is there. So maybe that 1/3 might need us for life. But the other 2/3, like, let them be people, let them be kids. Let's let them grow up. Let's let them do dishes. Let's let them learn to make their bed and dress themselves and all the things.
Yeah, and just help them, and you know, our kids will find where they're meant to be. You know, it's our job to kind of help them find that path, and whatever it is, just be open to that, you know. So yeah.
Amen.
How can people find you?
They can find me at Autism Savvy on Instagram, mostly on Instagram. And my website's autismsavvy.com.
Very cool. Thank you very, very much. And
It was so great to be here.
we'll have to do like a follow-up thing and maybe answer people's questions or something, like a Q&A or something like that. I think that would be
That would
interesting
be
to kind
fun.
of gauge what type of information parents are most looking for. I
Yeah,
don't know.
I would love that.
That'd be fun. All right.
Mhm.
Well, I appreciate it. I'll have all your information in the show notes, and we will talk soon.
Thanks, Rob.
See you.